On the morning of August 15, 1943, the first light of dawn crept over the Solomon Islands and revealed a stretch of coral beach that looked quiet, exposed, and dangerously unfinished. At exactly 0530 hours, Commander Andrew Lewis of the 58th Naval Construction Battalion stood near the waterline at Barakoma, watching the ramps drop from landing craft as bulldozers rolled forward into the surf. He already knew the clock was against him. He had 8 hours, no more, before Japanese aircraft would arrive to see what the Americans were doing in plain sight. His orders were simple in wording but brutal in reality. Carve a 4,000-foot runway out of raw coral before the enemy could stop it. Barakoma had no real defenses yet. A handful of .50 caliber machine guns and several 20mm Oerlikon cannons from the 4th Marine Defense Battalion were still being hauled ashore by sweating Marines. There were no bunkers, no hardened gun pits, no aircraft. Lewis had built airstrips before, from Guadalcanal to New Georgia, but never under direct enemy observation. Japanese destroyers sat just 12 miles north at Horaniu Bay, watching the coastline. To Lewis's men, Barakoma was a construction site. To the Japanese, it was already a target. By mid-afternoon, the inevitable happened. At 1,530 hours, the distant drone of engines grew into a scream as the first Zero fighters dove in from Rabaul. Coral dust exploded around graders and dump trucks as 20mm cannon fire stitched across the beach. Tires spun, blades stayed down, and engines kept running. Lewis didn't order anyone to take cover. He ordered them to keep working. From the air, the Japanese pilots saw exactly what Lewis wanted them to see: white scars in the coral, exposed machinery, men out in the open. What they could not see was that the runway was only part of what was being built. Barakoma's location was no accident. It sat on the southern shore of Vella Lavella, perfectly positioned to outflank the heavily defended Japanese stronghold on Kolombangara. Vice Admiral Theodore Wilkinson had chosen it precisely because it looked vulnerable. An unfinished airstrip on an open beach invited attack. The enemy would focus on destroying it from the air, convinced that bombing alone could erase the threat. That assumption would become their mistake. The strafing runs came in low over the palm trees. Cannon shells walked across the coral toward bulldozers that refused to stop. Seaman First Class Roberto Martinez stayed on his grader, smoothing the runway surface as bullets snapped overhead. Marine gunners wrestled Oerlikon cannons into rough positions, firing just enough to force the Zeros to pull up early. Lewis watched the attacks with a stopwatch in his hand, measuring the intervals between raids. The Japanese were flying from Bougainville, more than 200 miles away. Their fuel limits meant short attack windows. Between raids, Lewis pushed his crews hard, moving earth and laying coral in carefully calculated bursts of activity. As the attacks continued, something invisible to the pilots above took shape. The 40mm Bofors guns were being positioned at precise intervals, their overlapping fields of fire designed to shred low-flying aircraft. The 20mm cannons filled the gaps. Between them, bulldozers carved revetments and blast walls that would someday protect aircraft that had not yet arrived. The runway was growing, but so was a defensive system. Late in the afternoon, a second wave came in, 8 aircraft this time, including torpedo bombers skimming the water. Captain Frank Morris's gunners tracked them calmly. When the lead bomber pulled up over the beach, Bofors shells caught it cleanly. The aircraft exploded in midair, scattering flaming debris across the coral. Marines dove for cover. The Seabees did not stop. Lewis understood that the air raids were not just attacks. They were reconnaissance. The Japanese were mapping gun positions, studying patterns, trying to find a weakness. What they could not map was the radio traffic flowing out from Barakoma into the darkness to the north. 4 American destroyers, Nicholas, O'Bannon, Taylor, and Chevalier, were racing toward Horaniu Bay. Guided by new SG surface search radar, they could see small craft in total darkness. Along the coast, Lieutenant Commander Leroy Taylor's PT boats were slipping into shallow waters at 40 knots, hunting anything that moved slowly. The real threat to Barakoma was not bombs. It was barges. Japanese Daihatsu barges were small, shallow-draft craft that could carry 70 men or heavy supplies. At night, they hugged the coastline, landing troops for quick raids before disappearing into mangrove channels. They had disrupted airfield construction across the Solomons. Lewis had seen the pattern before. But this time, he intended to turn it inside out. As darkness fell on August 15th, the third air raid came in, trying to catch men during shift changes. This time the anti-aircraft fire was ready. Exploding shells forced the Zeros to stay high and ineffective. One aircraft limped away trailing smoke. Lewis walked the length of the runway under the fading light. Nearly 2,400 feet were already roughed in. The schedule was holding. But the true test was unfolding far to the north. Just after midnight on August 18th, Commander Thomas Ryan stood on the bridge of USS Nicholas, staring at the glowing sweep of his SG radar. Bright pips marked Japanese destroyers screening a barge convoy creeping south. Ryan's ships matched them destroyer for destroyer, but his advantage was decisive: radar that could see and shoot in darkness. Star shells burst overhead, revealing Japanese silhouettes. 5-inch guns roared, and the night exploded into fire. The Japanese fought back fiercely, laying smoke and maneuvering hard to shield the barges. Shells tore into steel. Fires burned. But while the destroyers fought, barges slipped into shallow water beyond the Americans' reach. When the action broke off, the Japanese had landed their troops. A barge base was now operational at Horaniu Bay. For Lewis, the news confirmed what he already knew. The trap was only half built. The runway had to be finished. Air power had to arrive. Without it, the barges would keep coming. For 40 days, the work never stopped. Air raids came again and again, 121 of them, but the schedule held. Coral was crushed, drained, and packed. Fuel tanks were buried. Revetments rose. By the morning of September 24th, the strip was ready. At 0630 hours, a bent-wing silhouette appeared over the beach. Major Gregory Pappy, Boyington eased his F-4U Corsair down onto the Coral. 11 more followed, touching down at precise intervals. Engines wound down. Ground crews swarmed. Lewis watched, calculating recovery times, fuel flow, and sortie rates. Barakoma was no longer a construction site. It was an air base. With fighters overhead, the system came alive. PT boats patrolled aggressively. Radar-guided night fighters hunted bombers. When Japanese barges ventured into open water, they were met by speed, firepower, and air attack working together. One night engagement after another ended with barges burning and sinking. The Japanese adapted, hiding closer to shore, but the pressure only increased. Reconnaissance teams were flown in. Observation posts appeared on ridgelines overlooking anchorages. Radio reports flowed back to Barakoma, then out to PT boats and fighters. The coastline became transparent to American eyes. By early October, Japanese positions were compressed, harassed, and cut off. When evacuation became the only option, American destroyers were waiting. Night battles flared again, torpedoes streaked through the dark, ships burned, and steel shattered. Some Japanese troops escaped, but the strategy had failed. When the final Japanese destroyer disappeared northward, Commander Andrew Lewis stood at Barakoma and looked down the length of the coral runway his men had carved under fire. What began as a vulnerable target had become the center of a machine that controlled sea, air, and coast. The Seabees had not just built a runway. They had built a system that broke an enemy's plan and reshaped the battle for the Solomons. The coral dust had long since settled, but the impact of what was built there would echo far beyond that exposed beach.